My pregnant ex-wife and her husband turned our daughter into their maid. When they refused to stop, I called her out as an unfit mother and fought for full custody. I'm a 40-year-old guy, and I have a 16-year-old daughter, Hazel, with my ex-wife, Margot, who's 38. Margot and I met when I was 21, and she had just turned 19. It all started at a friend's party where we clicked right away. I liked her so much that I asked her out that very night. She was smart, beautiful, and just had this way about her that I couldn't resist. To my surprise and luck, she said yes right then and there. We ended up being together for quite a while. A few months into dating, we introduced each other to our families, and by the time a year had passed, we decided to take things to the next level and move in together. Margot was in college nearby and living on campus, but I asked her to move into my apartment. She agreed without hesitation. This part of our story becomes important later because she eventually blamed me for everything that went wrong in her life, claiming I was the reason she never built a career for herself. But back then, she seemed genuinely happy to move in, and I didn't have to convince her at all. At first, everything was great. Our families got along, and we were head over heels in love. Life felt perfect. But that perfect bubble burst not long after Margot graduated from college. She found out she was pregnant. Now, just to set the record straight, it was Margot's decision to keep the baby. It's something she'd later hold against me for years, but back then, I told her I'd support whatever she decided. It was her body, and I respected that. When she told me she wanted to keep the baby, I was over the moon. At the time, I was 24 and working at a marketing and advertising firm. My job paid decently, and I was confident I could handle our living expenses and the cost of raising a child. However, childcare was out of our budget, and since Margot had just graduated with no work experience, I couldn't expect her to start working while pregnant. After a lot of conversations, we both agreed that she'd stay home to care for our child while I continued to work. I can't stress enough how much I tried to make sure she was certain about this choice. I probably asked her a million times if she was sure. The thought of her giving up her career because of me and the baby weighed on me heavily. But Margot insisted it was what she wanted, to focus on starting a family. She was incredibly smart and could have done really well professionally, but at that moment, she chose to stay home, and I supported her fully. It's crucial for me to say that every major decision we made back then was ultimately hers. Whether it was moving in with me, keeping the baby, or deciding to be a stay-at-home mom, I never pressured her. I made sure she had the final say because, frankly, she was the one with the most at stake. She was the one moving out of her dorm, carrying the baby, and putting her career plans on hold. My role was to support her in whatever she chose to do. But as life often goes, things got hard. After Hazel was born, Margot began showing signs of postpartum depression. I tried talking to her about seeing a therapist, but she'd brush it off, get irritated, and insist she was fine. Worried about her and the baby, I reached out to her parents, hoping they could convince her to get help. I had heard stories of postpartum struggles and feared she might unintentionally hurt herself or the baby. But no matter what I tried, she refused to admit there was an issue. Looking back, I know raising a child is incredibly hard, and I'll always be grateful for how much effort Margot put in during those early years. Still, I can't ignore how difficult she became to live with after Hazel's birth. In those first few months, I understood the stress and frustration. But even after a year or two, she was constantly angry at me. Conversations turned into fights, and I started feeling like she was always looking for a reason to argue. She'd snap at me over the smallest things, and while I let it slide at first, it became harder over time. I was working long hours to provide for the family, and coming home to an angry, resentful wife was draining. The fights escalated, and she kept blaming me for everything that wasn't right in her life. She'd accuse me of being ungrateful for the sacrifices she'd made, which I couldn't wrap my head around. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, every choice she made was her own. I never forced her hand. But no matter how much I tried to show her how grateful I was for all she'd done for me and our family, she never seemed to see it. I made a real effort to keep things alive in my marriage. Every weekend, I'd plan dates for Margot and me, and I'd take her out to nice restaurants at least 4 times a month because I knew how much she enjoyed those special nights. I celebrated every milestone with her in the grandest way I could, trying to show her how much I cared. But no matter what I did, it never seemed to be enough for her. She'd still complain, saying I wasn't grateful for all she had done. Even on our dates, instead of relaxing and enjoying the moment, she'd often find something to argue about. It felt like she was always searching for reasons to fight. It became exhausting, and after a while, I started to regret ever asking her out in the first place. When we fought, I tried to explain my side, but she'd always shut me down with the same line that she'd sacrificed her career to raise our daughter. I had promised to support her, so I bit my tongue and tried to deal with it. But let me tell you, being treated like a doormat isn't anyone's idea of support. I stuck around for Hazel's sake, though. I didn't want my daughter to suffer because of our issues. Margot and I stayed married for almost 5 years, but every year, the fights got worse, and my patience wore thinner. A few months after Hazel's 5th birthday, I came to a tough realization: this marriage wasn't salvageable. After one particularly ugly argument, it hit me that Hazel deserved a better environment to grow up in. By that point, Margot and I were either fighting or not speaking at all. It was a toxic environment, and I didn't want Hazel to grow up in the middle of it. I had always hoped that things would eventually improve, that Margot and I would find our way back to each other, but by then, I had lost all hope. I knew the best thing for everyone was to end the marriage. One day, I dropped Hazel off at my parents' house and sat Margot down to talk. I told her our relationship wasn't working and that for Hazel's sake, we needed to consider divorce. I didn't know how she'd respond, but I certainly didn't expect her to confess to having an affair. She admitted she'd been cheating on me for a while with a coworker of mine, no less. Apparently, they met at a work party she had attended with me. That revelation, oddly enough, made things easier for me. By then, I had already fallen out of love with Margot, but the affair still came as a shock. However, it erased any guilt I might have felt about leaving her. The divorce itself was pretty straightforward. It was mutual, and Margot didn't fight me on much. In fact, she let me have most of our shared assets. She didn't even ask for alimony, likely because she knew her affair had disqualified her from it. The one thing she fought tooth and nail for was partial custody of Hazel. I wanted Hazel to stay with me most of the time, 3 weeks out of the month, and for Margot to have her for 1 week. But Margot wasn't okay with that. She and her lawyer pushed hard for a 50-50 custody arrangement, and I eventually gave in. I wasn't interested in using Hazel to get back at Margot. At the end of the day, Margot was still Hazel's mother, and I couldn't take her away from that. Besides, I didn't want Hazel to grow up resenting me for keeping her from her mom. Looking back, it's ironic that Margot fought so hard for custody, considering how things are now. But after the divorce, things got a lot easier. Co-parenting allowed us to limit our interactions, and I felt like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in years, I could focus on myself and my dreams without tiptoeing around Margot. In fact, I made a major life change. I quit my job and started my own business, something I'd been wanting to do for years. Staying at my old job wasn't an option. I couldn't keep working there knowing the guy who wrecked my marriage was just a few desks away. Getting through work during the divorce was hard enough, there was no way I was staying there afterward. As for Margot and her affair partner, that didn't last long. She told me they broke up shortly after she announced our separation online. She even apologized to me again for everything, but by that point, her apology didn't mean much. The only reason I stayed in touch with her was because of Hazel. If it weren't for co-parenting, I wouldn't have had any reason to talk to her again. These days, Margot and I barely talk. It's been more than a decade since our divorce, and both of us have completely moved on. A couple of years ago, Harper got married again. Her new husband, let's call him Nolan, was someone her mother set her up with. They dated for about 2 years before tying the knot. From what I've heard, Nolan is an architect, and people seem to have nice things to say about him. Good for her, I suppose. As for me, I've had my share of casual relationships over the years, but nothing too serious. Let's face it, most women aren't jumping at the chance to date a guy with a teenage daughter. It's fine, though, I've made peace with it. But a few months ago, Harper dropped a bombshell: she was pregnant again. I'll admit, I was surprised. Given her age, I figured it might be a little risky, but with modern medicine, plenty of women go for late pregnancies. It wasn't my place to say anything, so I kept it simple and congratulated her. She thanked me, and that was that. I didn't think much about it afterward. However, not long after her announcement, I started noticing a change in Hazel. She became reluctant to go stay with her mom, and every time she came back, she looked exhausted and unhappy. At first, I chalked it up to her being busy with school or just regular teenage stuff. When I asked, she told me it had nothing to do with Harper and brushed it off, so I let it go. But this past month, things really stood out. When Hazel came back to my place, she looked more drained than ever. I knew something wasn't right. I tried talking to her about it, but for the first couple of days, she insisted everything was fine. I could tell she was holding something back, though. After some persistence, she finally opened up, and what she told me floored me. Hazel admitted that her mom and Nolan had been treating her like their personal housekeeper. Every day after school, as soon as she got home, she was expected to start cooking dinner. Once she finished that, they had her cleaning the entire house from top to bottom. And here's the kicker, they didn't clean up at all during the weeks she wasn't there. They just let the place turn into a disaster zone, knowing Hazel would handle it when she came back. Whenever Hazel tried to say she was too tired or didn't want to do it, Harper would guilt-trip her. She'd play the pregnancy card, saying she was too exhausted to help and reminding Hazel that I'd never been supportive when she was pregnant with her. She'd tell Hazel that she had hoped her daughter would be more sensitive and understanding than her ex-husband. Nolan, on the other hand, claimed he was too worn out from work to lift a finger. Harper even tried to justify it by telling Hazel it wasn't that much to ask since they had to do everything themselves when she wasn't there. Hazel didn't want to let her mom down or feel like she was abandoning her during the pregnancy, so she kept quiet and did all the work. She said it was a thankless job, but she pushed through it to avoid causing drama or stress for her mom. But the breaking point came right before Hazel returned home this time. She said that the day before she left, she was in her room packing her things when Nolan walked by. He asked why she was packing, and when she explained that it was time for her to go back to my place for the next 2 weeks, he made a comment about how much he was going to miss her. At first, she thought it was sweet until he added that the house was going to be a mess without her and joked about hiring a housekeeper for the 2 weeks she wouldn't be there. When Hazel asked him what he meant, Nolan told her, point blank, that she was basically their glorified housemaid. He said it as if it was a compliment, even adding that she was so good at it she could make a career out of it someday, unlike her mother, who he called useless. Hazel told me that was the moment she realized she couldn't keep going back there. She said she had been trying so hard not to think badly of Harper and Nolan, but Nolan's comment crossed a line. Honestly, I was stunned when Hazel told me all this. I'd only ever heard good things about Nolan from other people, so to hear that he said something so cruel and disrespectful completely caught me off guard. Hearing what Nolan had said to Hazel made my blood boil. It was probably the most misogynistic and disgusting thing I'd ever heard. I could barely keep my temper in check, but Hazel told me she'd already made up her mind she wasn't going back to her mom's house. She begged me not to make a big deal out of it, saying there was no need for me to confront anyone. But I couldn't just let it slide. I had to say something to Harper. After calming down for about an hour, I called her. I laid it all out, the way they'd been treating Hazel, Nolan's comment, everything. I demanded an explanation as to why she thought any of this was okay. I was furious. Our daughter is a 16-year-old high school student. There's no reason she should be working twice as hard as anyone else just because her mom and stepdad decided to pawn off their responsibilities onto her. I told Harper that, while I could understand her being too tired to pitch in much during her pregnancy, there was no excuse for Nolan. If a teenager can juggle school, housework, and still keep her grades up, then a full-grown man should be able to help around the house without whining about being tired. He's an adult. It's insanely unfair, borderline abusive, to make a kid shoulder that much work. To my shock, Harper started laughing. She told me it was no big deal, that Nolan was just joking and I was overreacting. I couldn't believe my ears. I told her it didn't matter if it was a joke or not, it was still hurtful and insulting to Hazel, and neither of us appreciated it. Harper doubled down, accusing me of stirring up drama where there wasn't any. She brushed it all off, saying this was just how they talked to each other, and it didn't bother her. She even defended Nolan, claiming she knew he didn't mean it seriously, and even if he did, it didn't matter because it's true. She said she didn't do much around the house anyway since she was a stay-at-home wife. I was stunned. This was not the Harper I knew. When we were married, she took pride in the work she did around the house, constantly reminding me how much effort it took to keep everything running smoothly. I respected her for that. But now, it seemed like she'd completely lost respect for herself. I couldn't hold back. I told her that, as far as I was concerned, she wasn't fit to be a mother anymore. And then I added, admittedly in anger, that I hoped her next child was a boy because she clearly wasn't equipped to raise a daughter. After that, I hung up the phone. That last remark of mine? Yeah, it didn't go over well. Harper and her family have been harassing me non-stop ever since, accusing me of being out of line and insensitive, especially since she's pregnant. Even Hazel thinks I should have let it go. She reminded me that she'd already decided not to go back and said I didn't need to stir up more drama. Update 1. It's been 4 days since I first shared this, and I've read through all the comments. Most of you agree that I did the right thing, and I really appreciate the support. But some of you don't believe I was a good husband when Harper and I were together. Let me set the record straight, I know exactly how supportive I was during our marriage. Our relationship didn't fall apart because of me. Harper wasn't willing to give us a real chance to make things work. If I wanted to, I could have used our struggles as an excuse to cheat on her, just like she did to me. But I didn't. I stayed committed to our marriage for Hazel's sake. Even when I eventually filed for divorce, I did it with Hazel in mind. I fully agree that housewives deserve more appreciation, I've always believed that. But let's not pretend Harper falls into that category anymore. Let's not forget that she cheated on me. After thinking it over, I've decided I don't owe Harper an apology. I didn't say anything wrong. I also had a long conversation with Hazel, and she told me she doesn't want to be around her mother for the foreseeable future. Hazel made it clear that if her mom could brush off what Nolan said like it was no big deal, then they obviously had very different ideas about how she deserved to be treated. Hazel doesn't want to go back to a place where she's not even shown the bare minimum of love and respect, and I agree with her completely. So, we've decided to file for full custody. Sure, she's only going to be a minor for 2 more years, but I want to ensure that for the time she is left as a kid, Harper can't pull anything to disrupt our lives or Hazel's peace of mind. Update 2. A couple of days ago, my lawyer and I officially filed for full custody of Hazel. Yesterday, Harper was served the papers. Let's just say she didn't take it well. She went off on social media, posting a long rant about how I'm the most insensitive man she's ever met. She claimed she regretted giving up everything for me and, as usual, blamed me for ruining her life. Same old song and dance. This time, though, I wasn't just going to sit there and take it. I screenshotted her post and sent it to my lawyer. Then, I decided to respond directly in the comments to set the record straight. I told the truth about everything for everyone to see. Of course, as soon as she realized I wasn't staying silent, she disabled the comments. Classic Harper move. She's all talk until someone challenges her. After that, I blocked her. And honestly, I feel like a huge weight has been lifted. I don't have to deal with her nonsense anymore. From here on out, whatever happens will be handled in court, and I'm fine with that. Update 3. Here's a surprising twist, we don't even need to proceed with the custody hearing anymore. Out of the blue, Harper decided to sign away her parental rights to Hazel. She emailed me about it a couple of days ago, and my lawyer quickly drafted the necessary paperwork. I didn't see this coming. The first time we fought for custody, Harper was relentless, she fought tooth and nail to keep Hazel with her. But now, it seems her priorities have shifted. She has a new family and, apparently, no room in her life for her firstborn. In her email, she once again blamed me for everything. She claimed I turned Hazel against her and poisoned her mind to make Harper seem like a bad mother. She even said she hoped I was happy now that I'd gotten exactly what I wanted, proof that she was a terrible mom, and Hazel's belief in it too. None of this is my fault, though. It's not like I told Harper and Nolan to treat Hazel the way they did. Hazel made her own decision not to live with them anymore, and all I did was support her. Terminating her parental rights does seem a bit extreme, but that was Harper's choice, and I'm not going to stop her from doing what she wants. When I told Hazel about it, she seemed a little upset, but she also said she thought it was for the best. She's such a strong kid, but I know this whole situation has taken a toll on her. That's why I've decided to put her in therapy. She's been through so much, and I think she deserves a safe space to process everything and find some peace. Honestly, I wouldn't wish a mother like Harper on anyone. But thankfully, that's no longer something Hazel has to deal with. Now, it's just the two of us, and I'm determined to be the best single father I can be. Hazel seems genuinely happy here with me, and I can only hope it stays that way.